All right, welcome back to Collectivitis. My name's Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Good to be here, Pietro. I'm great. Thanks for having me. Like always.
No worries. It is a pleasure to have you, Max. Despite what I say, sometimes it is a pleasure to have you. I'm super excited for tonight. I've got my Ron Paul shirt on for those who are viewing to see. That's how excited I am tonight, because we have our very first libertarian Victorian parliamentarian to interview tonight. That's a bit of a mouthful. We have the elected member for Northern Victoria region, who has been an absolute stalwart for liberty over the last 4 years, and especially noticeably over the last 2 years, throughout the whole COVID regime and everything. So we're super excited to have him, and he's actually very kindly donated his time because he's also in the middle of an ardent campaign to get re-elected in about 2 weeks. So super excited to hear from him. Without further ado, we will invite him in. Welcome to Collectivitis. How are you doing, Tim? Mr. Tim Quilty, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm good, and thanks for having me on.
Pleasure.
Thanks for being here. It's middle of campaigning. I'm sure sparing an hour for us is not easy, but yeah, we bloody appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's a relief to sit down for a while after standing up all day, handing out the how to votes. As I get older, it gets harder to do. I think this is my 7th or 8th election campaign that I've been involved in. And when I could go, once I could go all day, and now I'm feeling really sore.
Bit of election fatigue.
Day one.
Well, especially when your region's like 100,000 square kilometers, if I'm correct, you've got plenty of ground to cover.
Yeah, so I reckon I've done 10,000 Ks in the last month, just driving around, and we still only covered a fraction of it.
How are the potholes doing out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of it. A lot of potholes. I've done a couple of tires, and a lot of dodging, a lot of bumping. And the rain obviously is just making it worse every time. The rain never stops, and the roads were in a mess beforehand. There's been a lack of maintenance for years now, but 3 years of bad wet weather, especially this year, is really not doing them any favors either.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we'll jump into the first question, which we normally ask all of our guests, Tim. So first of all, we want to know about your journey your journey into libertarianism. Also, considering a lot of libertarians joke that they never actually want to be elected, we want to know about your journey into getting elected and even your campaign from 2018.
Yeah. All right. So look, I'm what I often describe myself as a natural libertarian. Even from a very young age, I've hated people telling me what to do. I'm saying, don't tell me, I can work it out for myself. And this is a trait that I can see in my children as well, I might add. I feel like it's probably genetic. I think I guess that goes back to the Celtic heritage, Irish and Scottish and so on. They're stubborn people who didn't want to be told what to do. But anyway, so I just had that natural dislike of authority, people giving me orders. I wanted to make my own decisions. And I'd rather make my decision and get it wrong and hurt. Even as a child, I did something I wasn't supposed to and hurt myself. I just put up with it because I did it myself. I don't need a nanny state to tell me what to do, and I never have. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want it. But anyway, so I guess my first exposure to libertarian ideas was, and this is not the usual one perhaps, but it's not uncommon. Heinlein's novel, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which I think I read when I was about 12, which is about, I don't know if you know it, but if you don't, it's about the moon, which is a prison colony where people of Earth have been exiled. And it's basically a libertarian society with very little government. And there is an authority that runs it, but the people themselves ignore that and just live their own lives. And it expounds a lot of libertarian ideas. And that was my first exposure in literature. I guess later there was Ayn Rand and so on, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, and various other sources. But I credit Heinlein as my first libertarian writer.
Could you digest it at 12? Was it already something that you were like, aware? Oh shit, the world is actually very much opposite to this thing that I'm reading. Maybe this is kind of a radical idea.
I think to some extent I could. I was a precocious child, I guess you could say. I was reading. I read a lot, and I really read a lot. I would read all the time. I used to go to school. I'd sit in class and I was bored, so I'd bring out a book and read it in class. And then this is especially in second class. I had a fight with a teacher over this. I read my book in class, and they'd come and confiscate it. So I packed myself 8 or 9 books for the day. So I just get out another one and read it again under the desk. So reading was my thing up until quite a late age. I read a lot. I was a nerd, book reading nerd. I read everything, and I think I had certainly ahead of my age at 12 idea of the world and so on. Whether obviously my political views have changed. I'm not saying at 12 I was.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. I hope you enjoyed that.
Hang on, I've got going to have to shut that down in the background. The Wodonga Council meeting is on somewhere.
Reported back to me that,
Just to show how important you are. That's it's good. Give some weight to your words for our viewers.
So my wife obviously is a councillor at Wodonga.
Yeah. And
they're having a special meeting tonight to elect the mayor, which was brought forward for some bizarre reason. Anyway, it's going to be deadlocked 3-3. Right. And anyway, so that's happening in the background.
And you'd rather be on Collectivitis than watching that unfold.
Yeah, definitely. So, where was it? So yes, so in a young age, I was aware of libertarian ideas and philosophy, and the idea of an overreach government pushing into things. I guess we talk about politics. So I'll just go on to, and then I went to university. I joined the Liberal Students, which at the time was not a part of the Liberal Party as such. I mean, they had Liberal Party kind of people in it, but they're also libertarians promoting free market ideas and libertarianism, as opposed to the Young Liberals, which was like a soft left liberalism. So there was some more exposure to theory in there and practice. So going back then to politics, the other story I tell is from a very young age, there was a magazine. And for those younger viewers out there, magazines are things made of paper that come out with articles in them and so on.
I reckon I've seen a TikTok about magazines. I know what they are.
There was a famous Australian magazine called The Bulletin, which was around for 130 years or something. It was one of the driving forces behind the Federation, and was a big pusher of the White Australia policy and all kinds of things from Australian history up until it disappeared in the early 2000s, perhaps, or late 90s. But anyway, as a child, we got this magazine every week, and I would read it avidly, not understanding much of it, but trying to. And a lot of big focus on politics, and so I was always reading up the opinion pieces on politics every week and forming ideas about it. So I've been interested in politics from a young age, and it was, I guess, I'm not that into sport. Not a big footy fan or anything else, whichever version of football we're talking about. But politics is really interesting to me, and watching political contests, and I watch things going on in America and Europe and South America elections and so on. It's a hobby. Actually, I've done it much less since I've been elected myself. But historically, I'm very much into politics as a sport, I guess. I joined the Liberal Party at university, and I was a member for a few years, and then I left the Liberal Party in about '96. When that was Howard's gun laws came in, and that was too much for me. I wasn't going to support a party that was going to be taking guns, disarming the population. So I quit. And I said, "This is the end of politics for me. I'm going to just go back to being a farmer now."
Was there a big exodus from the Liberal Party at that point?
There was probably the National Party more so. They lost a bunch of members.
Yeah,
but there was certainly a big turnover there, and other parties got started. The Shooters Party started up around that time, and so on. But yeah, so I quit the party, and I'm out of politics forever. And then I went to a party at a house in Canberra in about 2000 and 2002 with a friend from school. I was sort of got up from the farm, drove up to Canberra for the weekend, and we went to a party. And at the party, I met John Humphreys, who was a young economist working in Treasury, who had just started a libertarian political party. And I thought, oh, these are my people. And I got involved. I joined the party, and I said, this is perfect. I can indulge my interest in politics without ever worrying about being elected. And so I ran for the party in 2004. Actually, we weren't even registered in 2004. So we ran as the Outdoor Recreation Party. We borrowed that party to run. I ran the federal election in 2007 federal election when we were Liberty and Democracy Party, which apparently we are about to become again.
There we go. That's a bombshell exclusive we just got.
I think I'm not.
I think the name's up in the air, but anyway, that's
right. 2004, 2007, 2010. I didn't run in 2013 because I just started a new job at the tax office as a public servant, and I thought it would look odd me running as a libertarian who hates tax. I did run in 2016 in the federal election, which is when and I was obviously quite right about my earlier thing because I deeply upset some senior ATO public servants when they found out that I think taxation is theft. It was very alarming for them. And then I ran, just after the federal election, I ran for council in Wodonga, and I was elected then. And that was very interesting. And then I had thought maybe one day I'd end up on a council somewhere. So I thought, all right, I've reached my pinnacle of political achievement here. And dug into council, and Wodonga Council is a very dodgy sort of council. I probably shouldn't say too much on air or I might get sued, but I think there are definitely governance issues there, have been for years, and they still go on. But I was only on council for 2 years, which included an IBAC investigation kicking off. That's interesting. And then I was elected to, the party asked me to run for the state upper house. And I thought, all right, sure. They said, you're not going to win. I said, yeah, right, I'll do that. So again, I quit my job at the tax office to run. And there was some uncomfortable things on my way out where they probably would have tried to sack me if I had gone back after because if you're a public servant federally, you can go back if you leave to run in a job, in an election. So anyway, but there would have been issues there if I had gone back. But unbeknownst, or by that stage, by the actual time the election was on, I knew we had a good chance with the preferences. But those plans had changed from when I agreed to run to when the actual election happened, and they were now preferencing Northern Vic. And so I got a 3.7% vote, but a good flow of preferences, which got me elected into Parliament.
So were you expecting to be elected by the time the actual election day came around? Was that
I knew I had a fair chance.
Yeah.
I didn't really believe it was going to happen until it happened. But in the last few months, I did know there was a fair chance it would happen.
And was that a huge overhaul on your whole life, just going from not being, doing whatever you were doing in your own private life to suddenly there I am, member of Parliament?
It was a massive change, and obviously disrupted everything in my life, my family, and I got 2 young kids, so there's a whole lot of travelling away from home. I probably wasn't that much still in the public eye. There was local news articles and so on, but until the pandemic came around, we still didn't have very much cut through. No one recognised me when I was, by and large.
Yeah.
After the pandemic, the last 2.5 years, I do get recognised when I travel around now. Not by everybody. I don't have David's level of notoriety, but people do recognise me now and say, "Oh, Tim Quilty, Liberal Democrats," or "Aren't you that guy on TV?"
What was the time frame between election day and then finding out that you'd actually been elected?
It was about 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks. What was that like? Was it tense? Were you excited? Were you nervous?
A little bit nervous. There was a lot of checking the screen, hitting refresh. Nothing's changed. Yeah. So, funnily enough, David did not believe he'd been elected. So when the results came out and they're all over social media, I said, David, I messaged him. We weren't talking then. I just sent him a message saying, "Oh, you've been elected," and he's going, "No, bullshit. No, I don't believe it." And it took about an hour for him to actually believe he'd been elected too. So, but there were two of us got up, and that was a really fortunate thing. I think it would have been very, very hard to do what we'd done just as a single MP. You might have argued about how well we've stuck to libertarian philosophy or anything else, but I think having the both of us there to bounce ideas off, to talk each other down from doing stupid things, to keep each other on track, has worked really well for us. And I'm quite sympathetic to our previous MPs, David Linehelm and Aaron Stonehouse, being in the Parliament by themselves. Some people might think they've wandered off on strange directions occasionally, but I think that would be very easy to have happen, being the only Libertarian MP in the Parliament. So for David and me, I think we're both lucky to have each other. And it was really noticeable when David quit to run in the federal election. There was a lot more work to try and do by myself. So turns out I wasn't carrying him at all. He was pulling his weight.
Well, something that I don't know whether this was intentional between the two of you, but something that I kind of notice since I've started paying attention to how the two of you conduct yourselves in Parliament is that he's kind of the calm, almost pleasing everyone, keeping everyone on side, nurturing relationships type of voice, whereas you're the more out there, say it how it is, almost insulting when you need to be to other parties and other elected members. Was that an intentional decision, or is that just sort of how it's panned out?
I think on one level, everything in politics is slightly staged. That it's not that we're making it up. That's me and that's David. They're our characters, but we also does get played up a little bit. And so he is good cop, I'm bad cop.
Yeah,
from time to time. But it's not that we made it up. It's just that you exaggerate your character traits a little bit, perhaps.
I think it could also be sort of country boy characteristics. You just tell everything how it is.
Oh, absolutely. And it's my natural me to some extent. Although I don't like public speaking. And this is my sister. After I've been elected, my sister said, "What the hell have you done? You hate talking in public." And I'm going, fair point. What have I done?
That's me every single time I listen back to an episode of this podcast that Pietro's dragged me into.
Sorry.
So yeah, I'm not a great public orator. When you'll see me in Parliament, I always write my speech down beforehand. And if I try and talk without notes, I forget what I'm going to say. I can get halfway through it and then I've missed out 3/4 of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, an observation that I remember making. So I started paying a lot of attention about a little over a year ago, when the mandates and stuff started being really imminent, and so I really started paying a lot of attention. And straight away, that was when I really got to know yourself and David. And there's a speech that springs to my mind, which actually I was just rewatching to jog my memory just before this, which was the one that you gave just prior to the mandate for parliamentarians, where you had to present your vaccination papers to come into Parliament, which obviously you and yourself and David Limbrick, and as well as Catherine Cumming, stood against and did your Parliament in exile and all of that. And in that speech, you're scathing. Like you refer to the Labour Party, you compare them to dictators and almost compare them to Nazis. The Liberal Party, you call them cowards. The crossbenchers, you call them soulless. And you're doing all of this with like this, you're not particularly comfortable with the aura of public speaking. And to me, I don't know, that was so like, this is perfect. This is a libertarian who doesn't really like the spotlight of Parliament, compared to all these like super trained and super polished, like up through the system, Liberal and Labour, shills for a message that is not pro-individual at all. And that to me spoke almost as loudly as the horrible things you were saying about Liberal and Labour, which also spoke to me extremely loudly. So I don't know, to an extent, maybe it does play to your credit a little bit, the nervousness and the not being overly good at public speaking.
Well, hopefully, because it's good to turn a negative into a positive. Yeah, look, I remember that speech fairly well. I often, when I get up and speak in Parliament, I don't remember the actual speech. I remember the first page and the last page, but if there's anything in between, it's gone out of my mind mostly. I actually remember most of that one delivering it. I was pretty annoyed at the time.
You can tell.
It was an extraordinary thing that they were doing, purging the Parliament. It's absolutely outrageous in a Westminster democracy for that to happen. That's the powers they used are for the rarest of occasions when you have a criminal in the Parliament and you can't be prosecuted while he's in the Parliament. So it's to remove their immunity and expel them so that they're a murderer or something. To kick somebody out because they wouldn't show their vaccination papers, it was an absolute tearing down of hundreds of years of history in the Parliament.
Especially if you look at how important all of that ended up being now, like a year on, and try and explain that decision to someone now compared to them, it's absurd. And
not just, Labor doing it because Labor are dodgy and corrupt and don't care, would tear up anything to get their goals, but the Liberals going along with it, they're utterly spineless, and the rest, all the crossbench, almost all the entire crossbench. And I think Jeff Borman was the only one who didn't vote for it other than me, David and Catherine. Some of the people on the crossbench who care about procedure and the way things are supposed to work voted for it. So anyway, I was outraged and angry, and I probably didn't give them as much as they deserved.
I agree, but it was a lot more than I'd ever seen anyone else give them. So I was very impressed with that. Did you lose some faith in the democratic process throughout that moment, but also throughout your last 4 years? Are you more or less optimistic about promoting libertarianism through Parliament?
Well, ironically, libertarian ideals have with all the crackdowns that the government imposed, libertarian ideas have become more attractive to people. I was actually quite despairing of the idea of promoting the philosophy prior to the pandemic lockdown because we were up there delivering and it seemed like no one was listening at all. During the pandemic, there suddenly became a market that was interested because they were they were the ones under the whip. We talked about the frogs in the pot boiling. The government that's been boiling the waters of liberty for a long time, heating them up, and everyone's swimming around. This is fine. During the pandemic, they suddenly turned the heat up to high, and a bunch of people noticed. A bunch didn't still, but a bunch really did. And so, ironically, the lockdowns and the crackdowns were actually good for spreading the philosophy. And you can see that in our party membership numbers. We went from having around 2,000 members prior to the pandemic lockdowns to now we're sitting on 16,000, 17,000 active members, half of which are in Victoria. So that's quite clearly Dan Andrews is the best salesman for liberty we've ever had, apparently.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so I don't know, where are we going with that?
Well, I was just asking whether you were more or less optimistic about libertarianism now than 4 years ago.
I think I'm more optimistic if provided we can get re-elected, and there's no guarantees about that. In fact, I would say probably my chances are only 50-50 coming up. If we can get in and get one or two more voices for it, I think the message is resonating, and there'll be more opportunities to deliver it. Whether we'll actually create a libertarian state, I think don't hold your breath. It'll be a long, hard battle to wind back Victoria. I like to think of myself as I'm currently standing in the path of the juggernaut, trying to slow it down with my body rather than pushing it back up the hill at this stage.
And that's something I'm kind of curious of because in my view, like the state is this completely bloated, overbearing, horrific entity that is just growing and encroaching so much. And to be a libertarian within the mechanisms of the state must be this really interesting place to be. Like your work colleagues every day, with the exception of David Limbrick, obviously, are people who either are, kind of semi-sociopaths who are using their positions of influence to improve their own vested interests, or intentionally growing the state to continue to perpetuate an ever increasing authoritarian society. So do you find that a really strange place to be? Is there animosity between you and your colleagues? Like, what is that like?
In general, there's not a lot of animosity in the upper house. There is some Labor MPs especially can be quite vindictive. There's 2 or 3 of them that were particularly so, but others were quite friendly and open, and there is reasonable relationships behind the scenes with a lot of people. But certainly I think they had no idea what the hell libertarianism was, but when we got there, the vast majority of people in the room had never even heard of the idea. And we had people coming up to saying, wow, your philosophy is really strange. It's like this mix of free marketism and social freedom, and we've never heard of this thing before.
What a sobering comment. Like, your philosophy, which we believe is so beautiful and true, is strange or unheard of. Is that
what is this haven world that you speak of?
Yeah.
It's even more shocking that they've never even heard of these ideas, which are the fundamental basis of Western society.
Yeah. I've mentioned this other times, but the USA, when it first was independent from England, was probably the most libertarian government a government has ever been. And the idea that that's now strange, that's now somehow this remote, antiquated kind of that's an interesting little idea that you've got over there is absurd. It's the enormous state that's never been tried on the long term. That's the thing that's scary.
Well, I mean, it's been tried. We've had endless examples of socialism, and they all fail. I know we're going to talk about REXIT at some point, so I don't want to preempt the discussion, but one of the reasons for wanting to make a new state is we get to write a whole new constitution. So instead of trying to amend the Victorian constitution to retrofit a Bill of Rights, which is part of our party platform, we will actually get to write a whole new constitution from scratch and embed fundamental rights into the constitution, and also limits on government power, so that there's a chance, the best chance for liberty, I think, is in creating a new entity where the government is limited from the start. It's still going to be a big ask, but
well, let's jump into REXIT now then, I reckon, while we're on the topic.
Yeah, it's a good segue.
Yeah, good segue. Let's bring it up. Tell us about it. Like, we want to know the philosophy behind it, the likelihood of it ever happening, and obviously it starts with a movement and building momentum. Realistically, is it?
What is REXIT first of all, and then tell us about it.
Yeah, so REXIT is the idea of regional exit, to the idea to make a new state from parts of regional Australia, so splitting up existing states. And I mentioned this in my maiden speech in Parliament, but at the time it was partly tongue-in-cheek. I was looking for something for some impact, and I'm saying, if you don't change what you're doing to regional Victoria, we're going to leave you. It's not us, it's you. But over time, I've become even more serious about the idea. I've thought for many years is that we should make new states and separate from the cities. And about from the time I was reading the Australian Constitution and found I was about 16 or so, and found the mechanism for making new states. And when they wrote the Constitution, they written in clauses to create new states. And they expected that we would, as Australia grew and populated, we would divide up the existing states into smaller ones. And something went wrong on the way there. And instead of populating the inland of Australia and growing, we instead concentrated our population more and more in 2 or 3 big cities, and abandoned the rest of the country. And part of that is it's natural dynamics, economic and political dynamics. When you have a powerful government in a city, that government's going to spend it's going to take resources from everywhere and spend them in that city. And we've had this happening in Australia for 200 years now. They've been taking resources from all the areas they control and spending it within their people, their supporter base in the city, and building a public service in the city, funding infrastructure in the city, and not anywhere else. And that becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. The more you spend in the city, the more wealth is created in the city, and the people who come there to take those jobs, and then you have to spend more there. And because more people come there, their votes are more important. So you need to take more money to spend on those people to buy their votes.
But it's a common phenomenon, even in the US, and I know the US specifically. I'm sure it's true elsewhere, but that the more like urban population is, the more they vote left. So the more leftist, the more they're pro spending and spending and spending without any regard toward the consequences. And if they continue to spend it in the city grows and expands and continues to vote left. So I'm guessing that's the same sort of principle here, essentially.
I'm sure it is. Talking about the US, one interesting thing is that I don't think any states, or if there are, there's only a handful, that the biggest city in the state is also the capital. Almost always, the capital is a smaller town at some remove from the biggest city. And they've separated the government to some extent from the actual center of economic power.
That's interesting.
And that, I think that's a deliberate check and balance on the growth there. How well has it worked? Well, not that well, obviously, but better than it's worked in Australia, where we've deliberately combined them.
Well, that's right. Melbourne spends for Melbourne, and that's we can see that patently at this election. Like, it's the.
I talk about the Melbourne government because it is the Melbourne government. They're governing for Melbourne. They're spending well over $200 billion on rail projects in Melbourne, and there's no money to repair the regional rail system. And this is something I have some issue with, because I talk about being a libertarian. At the same time, here I am calling for spending money on railway lines in regional Victoria. It's a circle I have to try and square somehow. But as long as the government's in control of these assets, then the government has to be the one that fixes them. We can privatise them, but if we privatise a broken railway system, who's going to buy it? They've already broken it now. For about $1 billion, we could have fixed all the regional rail system. It's not that expensive. There's a number of projects that need to be run, but well managed. We get functioning lines and functioning passenger trains that could at least break even. And we did a study on for example, one of the things I talked about is bringing passenger trains back to Mildura. And they say that service will at least break even if it was up and running. But it needs the government to get out of the way and let it happen. And if we could actually privatise the trains and have them run to make a profit instead of being run by Vic Rail, they could probably make a profit quite easily. One of the reasons the rail system in regional Victoria got shut down is because it was so inefficient, so bloated with people, with workers who were doing nothing, and so unionised, and also corrupt, and stuff was being stolen all the time. And the simpler way to fix it was to just shut the whole thing down, and that's what they did effectively. But in the process, they didn't shut it down for a little bit to fix it. They just closed it all down, and that's one more nail in the coffin of regional towns. Having a functioning transport system is useful. And even I'm talking about economics, we've now done billions upon billions of dollars damage to our roads in regional Victoria. We talked about potholes earlier. One of the reasons for that is we now have 95% of the grain harvest being sent by truck rather than train. So while we fail to spend the $1 billion we need to fix the railway system, that we then incur multiple billions of dollars of damage to the roads that need to be fixed. So even from a simple economic point of view, it doesn't make sense not to fix the rail, but there's no direct link. You can't say, oh, if I fix the trains, I'd now save $1 billion. They say it's a cost here, not a saving. Anyway, government's incompetent is the short answer.
I think that's about the summary of every episode we do anyway. So.
I want to know a little bit more about the specifics, like with the proposal of REXIT, like the boundaries. I want to know where do you draw the line? Literally a bubble around Melbourne, or are you including some regional cities? Where does it go? It's New South Wales as well, I believe.
Yes. All right. So the first proposal that we drew, the first map we drew, we picked up the whole Murray-Darling Basin and we put a ring around all the catchment areas, and this is our new state. And so it took in a lot of southwest Queensland, most of western New South Wales, or most of western and southern New South Wales, and about 60% of Victoria or 70% of Victoria, and also the South Australian Riverlands down to the mouth of the Murray. And so this would be a perfect state. It makes sense. It's based on water and irrigation and natural movement of people. Just as an aside, putting a boundary on a river is the dumbest place to put a boundary, because people live on rivers and towns live across them.
Go half and half, yeah.
And when you whack up a wall on the boundary, it causes massive economic disruption, as we saw during.
Yeah, especially when they shut borders too. Yeah.
When New South Wales shut the border to Victoria the first time, just on that first morning, there were in and around Albury-Wodonga, there were 10,000 people couldn't get to work, and that's a size that's like, I don't know, 5% of the population, or 10% of the I don't. What's the population? 85. It's over 10% of the population. I'm an accountant. So it's, people just couldn't get to work, and this is imposed by a government in Sydney who hadn't even occurred to them that there could be a problem, because they had just no knowledge about water areas. They had no knowledge about what's happening outside of the city.
Because there were periods when Victoria was in a lockdown and Sydney wasn't. And in those border towns, is that literally how it happened? Like 10 meters away from you, someone was able to go to work and you had to be locked down?
Pretty much, yeah. And at some stage, other stages, we had the border bubble, where you were, if you didn't leave the bubble, you're allowed to cross the border. But then you have in New South Wales people who are not wearing masks and wandering around, and the Victorians, everyone in Victoria is wearing a mask. And so where would you go to shop if you can cross the border and not wear a mask? Everyone obviously left, crossed the border, went to the shopping in New South Wales and so on. There were a whole bunch of ludicrous things. And then at some point they decided, we're going to enforce the Victorian rules on Victorians in New South Wales, so that supposedly the Victorians in New South Wales were supposed to wear their masks in New South Wales.
Right.
And stupid stuff. Anyway, so none of it made sense. Wodonga didn't have a case of COVID for 18 months until we abandoned lockdowns altogether. But still, and all little towns that never had them, but we kept imposing the Melbourne rules on the whole state. It was ludicrous. But again, you have a government in Melbourne that not even aware of conditions in the regions. They want a centralising government. They don't want to decentralise power. They want to centralise. That's their natural instinct at socialists, is to take all the management control and run it from the centre, even though that's stupid.
Absolutely.
One of the things, there's a pub up at Dartmouth, and if you know Dartmouth, so they built it to build the Dartmouth Dam. It's a little town in the middle of nowhere. There's a great big pub there, and it's got 10 or 15 or 20 rooms and spaces and so on. And they could have had 10 people in each of those spaces and had a couple hundred people in the pub completely safely. But they're still under the same rules as everyone else who was allowed to have 5 people, whatever the rule was at the time. They just imposed the blanket rules for Melbourne across the whole state. It was all nonsense. Yes.
So back to sorry, I was going to just quickly jump back to the boundary. So that was the first proposal.
Yeah.
How many proposals have there been? 2, 3, 4?
We've got quite a few different maps. So eventually we realised having 4 states is going to make it really, really complex. So we went back to 2 states. So my preferred model right now is Western and Southern New South Wales, and Northern and Western Victoria. There's a question of whether Eastern Victoria on the other side of the mountains gets included, because geographically that's a bit problematic. Maybe, and whether Southeast New South Wales is included as well, because it's Canberra and again the mountains. But something like that. The most radical model is literally put a bubble around Melbourne and Geelong, and a bubble around Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong, and take everything else to make a new state, which would be 25% of the population of both, and a larger chunk of the economy, the productive economy. There is a net, people talk about the regional areas being subsidised by the city, but actually there's a net flow of money from the city from the regions to the city. And they say, oh, it's going to the public service, and the public service is working for all of the state. So even though that money is spent in Melbourne, you get the benefit out of it. But I'd argue we don't. If that was the case, they should decentralise the whole public service into the regions anyway. They should cut the public service first of all, but then they should also decentralise it. So where was I going with that? Anyway, so there is a net flow of resources, of money, of people into the cities that needs to be reversed. So maps, the different options. So when we talked about proposal for REXIT to get it up, we were saying we should have a referendum in council areas. And the further those council areas are from the big city, the more likely they are to join. And so rather than saying this area should be in, this area shouldn't, we thought we'd run the referendum to find out which areas want to be in it and then get them. But I think once the idea starts to build momentum, it'll be quite popular, and most places want to join in.
I love the sound of REXIT and becoming more and more pro-REXIT every day. And we're based in Ballarat, so I'm glad to hear that we are included in the new state under the latest proposal. Mm-hmm. What's the capital city going to be, and what's the name of the state going to be?
So I'm open to, like, I'm not making the rules here. I'm not your real father. I proposed Echuca Moama because it's a small town on the border. It's about geographically the middle. It's got a railway line. So it's got all the things you need for a capital. There is room around it. But the idea would be we don't want to recreate a new Melbourne. We want to have a decentralised state where the power is spread out, where if we have to have government employees, they're spread out. There's no one centre of power. Everything is decentralised. And Echuca is a good town to do that in because it's not very big to start with, and we can keep it small. So rather than the big cities of Bendigo, Ballarat, or Goulburn or whatever, whoever's going to be in it, we want to pick somewhere smaller to do it in, and keep it. And right from the start, right into the DNA of the new state, decentralisation, small, limited. The government's not here to solve your problems for you. And so Echuca Moama, and the name I say is Murray because it's based very much on the Murray Basin, but again, I'm open to suggestions. I'm not locked into that. It's just the best one I've come up with so far.
So what is the kind of process? What would it take for us to actually get a new state? Who would have to agree? Like, what's the legal sort of process to get to that point?
Right, so it's actually quite simple. And I was saying they wrote a mechanism into the Constitution. So the simplest way to do it is literally the state votes to release some land. So you have a vote in the Parliament, and the majority vote in the Parliament says we'll let this area go. And then you have a vote in the federal Parliament saying this will be a new state. And bingo, 2 votes. You don't need a referendum or anything else. You
make that sound simple, as if the state, and when I say the state, I mean, broadly the institution of the state is going to do anything that allows decentralization. That sounds incredibly difficult.
Yeah. So, and I've discussed about it's all about incentives. You've got to find the right angle to sell it on. So, for example, you go to Dan Andrews and say, "Let my people go." Regional Victoria wants to go, and you say, "Look, here there are 20. We have 88 electorates in the Victorian Parliament, and here are 22 of them, and 2 of them vote Labor. We take this out, and bingo, you're Premier for life, and you don't even need emergency powers to do it."
So you're abandoning the right-leaning conservative people of Victoria to a leftist government forever.
Well, we're not building a wall; they're free to leave.
That's a good point.
And then you go to the federal government. See, I was saying this when there was a coalition federal government, and saying, "Here's a new state, which is conservative. There'll be 12 senators. There'll be a majority of conservatives. They might not necessarily vote for you, but they'll be conservatives. And that'll change the balance of power federally in the Senate. So that's good for you. And they go, yeah, that works.
So the easiest way to sell it would be federally a liberal government, and in Victoria and maybe New South Wales, a Labor government. And that's where the incentives are the best.
Well, we can find other incentives. So we go to the National Party and say, here's a state where you can be the premier. The Nationals can run, they can be the government. Liberals can be the minority partner or the opposition, provided the Nationals can keep their. There's a big move against the Nationals in regional Victoria. They're really on the nose. But if they could get over those problems, which they might, having their own state separated from the city, then there's an opportunity for them to be the party of government. So it's just a matter of finding the way to sell it. But if the people get on board, the idea builds up its own momentum. At some point, they can't stop. They can stop it, but they won't. The forces to make it happen will be too strong.
I, for one, look forward to our new haven state of Murray.
Yes, and like I said, we can write a new constitution. We can limit government powers, give people a right to self-defence. I would include a Bill of Rights, largely modelled on the US Bill of Rights. Probably there will be some tweaks there, here and there. There's a chance to renegotiate agreements with the federal government in a whole new situation. So there's absolutely, that becomes the best opportunity for liberty in Australia. It's like a new state project, the American Libertarian New State Project.
Yeah, Free State Project.
Free State New Hampshire thing. We're creating a liberty state, and people will then increase as the economy booms, and it's a low tax situation with freedom of choice. We expect people will move there because they want to experience it.
Yeah, it's kind of like what's happened in the US with Florida, when Florida was not stayed open and unlocked, and all the things that were at least libertarian-esque, and a whole bunch of liberty-minded people moved to Florida because that was the best place to be. And now Florida has gone from being a swing state to being a deep red state, simply because of that. So I mean, I suppose that's the most realistic avenue we even have towards decentralization and decreasing the power of a state, is almost like a national divorce in through locality, through the most, finding a place with the most like-minded people.
What happens if the adverse happens? What happens if all the city people move out, look at this great lifestyle, but bring their city ideologies in and infiltrate it? We've seen that happen over the last 2 years with people moving out of the city, like due to COVID.
Yeah. That's always a risk, but if we write the constitution properly with limits on government power, then there's only so much damage they can do.
Of course.
They have no power, no ability to do that stuff. Yes, well, and if people want to let their freedom slip again, well, that's on them. We're going to give them another chance, and they have to keep it with liberty this time.
Then we create a second REXIT, a smaller, more regional state. It just gets further and further out.
Re-REXIT.
So there's also a movement, obviously, in North Queensland to separate from the rest of Queensland. About in discussion with them, they're talking about rebranding their movement REXIT as well. So we might have a
I think there's a movement somewhere in Europe as well that copied us. I think they call it Brexit,
had a B at the start or something weird like that. So I suppose one thing that I'm kind of curious to get your opinion on, given that you have seen the inner workings of the machine, is if there is hope for a libertarian future, and I certainly see some hope for it there in the REXIT idea, but if there is hope for a libertarian future, what does it look like, and how do we get there? Is the parliamentary avenue the correct or the most lucrative way to get there, or what do you think is the way to a more free society?
So on one hand, there are economic forces, all the forces of society are in play against freedom, and the only way we've ever experienced freedom as people is by creating new states, by new countries, by moving away from tyranny to create new situations. And I feel like ultimately, in the long run, that's what we're going to have to do again. We'll create seasteads or sea states, and then go into space and create space states where people can be free. I feel like the chances for liberty on Earth gradually decrease. And I sometimes think my role is, like I say, is to push back, to slow, to stop, maybe push it back a little bit. But I do think ultimately there'll be a continuing slide against liberty while people are being people. And you need new frontiers where people who want freedom can always go and get away.
That's kind of why I'm sort of pessimistic about it as well. It is because, even if you look 100, 200 years ago, the values that people had were so much more liberty minded. And as you mentioned before, the slow pot boiling the frog, it is very true. Like the values of individual liberty that people hold now are so much smaller. Like it took such a monumental shakeup with COVID for people to even get upset about the fact that the government controls their lives. So that's kind of the point I was getting at, but sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine. We should, when we talk about that, be aware of liberty, as the left are off like to point out, liberty for some. So the white males who own property in the US had rights and were free. So for many people, this much more powerful state has made them freer than they would have been otherwise. So when you create a new society, you've got to build in checks and balances that provide everyone with opportunities rather than limiting people by category. So it's important not to forget that. But in principle, I agree with what you were saying, that we've lost a whole amount of freedom.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying about like the landowners being the only ones allowed to vote in the past and whatnot. But even that was, they were coming from monumental shifts in just the way technology and society was moving throughout, post-industrial revolution and whatnot. Like we were moving in the direction of more freedom simply through prosperity anyway. I don't know that necessarily it's the modern ethos that has given us all that much more freedom, or possibly some. But yeah, that's it's an interesting world, and it's very difficult to predict where we go from here, because I don't feel like there's much room for much more state without some really dire consequences on our way of lives.
Look, I like to talk about the government. Every time the government makes a new regulation, they're creating a sea anchor and throwing it out the back of the economy. And I talk about, anyway, sea anchor is a bit of a joke now in my office because Dean says no one knows what a sea anchor is. I feel like it's obvious. It's like a thing that trails behind the ship, slowing it down. Anyway, so every regulation, everything the government does, every rule it makes is little anchors that pull us down, slow us down, reduce growth, waste resources, and limit future opportunities. And one of the reasons we push against it is because they're making us poorer in the long run. You're trying to eat some of the future prosperity now, and it's a bad idea because we haven't got to where we need to be. In 100 years' time or 200 years' time, we might get out the singularity with I'm a techno optimist. I think the future is wonderful. We'll have fantastic computers and technology. We'll have space elevators. We'll have a civilization in space, endless opportunity. What is it? What's the term? Not the inflection. The singularity. Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, where we become resources are no longer limited.
Okay. Yeah.
And you have your wonderful space communism.
Post-scarcity society, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's coming, but if we don't derail it first. And so one of our jobs is to stop the government derailing that so we continue progressing to get there.
You're not worried about the increase in technology being something that is only increasing the power of the state at the expense of the individual? Like, say, for example, with China's what's it called, social credit score, and how Trudeau in Canada froze the protesters' bank accounts when they protested. That's not a fear you have of the increasing ability of technology?
Oh, it's absolutely a risk, and we need to be willing to stand up and fight against it. And if we don't do that, then that will absolutely happen, and we'll have the Chinese dystopia where the government controls everything, sees everyone, and there's no way out of it. They saw 1984 was a manual rather than a warning, I think. So yeah, we have to be oppose that, and that's part of our job as libertarians in government is to oppose these things and raise awareness that these things need to be fought, stop them, slow them, so the economy can outpace the government.
Well, that's why there's always a role for libertarians, no matter who forms government, even if it's a libertarian government, just to hold them to account and keep them in line, stop encroachment.
It's an interesting way to put it. Allow the economy to outpace the government, because I think it encapsulates it well, that like the economy does well despite, like, we're in prosperity despite the best efforts of the government and of the flawed incentives that come with the democratic process. Each government that's trying to win an election just wants to spend and give and gift and promise as much as it can without any real consideration for years and years into the future, which is...
Aren't we seeing that in Victoria now?
Oh, absolutely. Well, Victoria and the whole world is on the cusp of either a recession or inflation, depending on which way the reserve banks decide to go. And either way, it's going to be a period of suffering, which is caused entirely because of, the perverse incentives that come with a government promising and just gifting money for votes, money for votes exercise.
Unfortunately, things always get worse before they get better. It takes the worst times for people to actually wake up and see what's happening.
Generally speaking, I mean, maybe we can turn that around before that happens.
Hopefully.
Maybe not.
It's a somber way to end the podcast. Look, I definitely think there's hope, but you can't be a libertarian in the modern world without being wary of the fact that there are, it's a grim outlook in a lot of the places we look it's certainly rays of hope. Is there any last thoughts either of you had, Tim or Max, before we finished?
So I guess I always tend to be pessimistic about this stuff. When, again, David and I are different characteristics. You ask David what we've achieved in Parliament, and he's coming up with great lists of things and how we change them. You asked me, and I said, "Oh yeah, not much." Didn't stop at stuff. I stood up against it, but we didn't actually stop it. So I guess I can be more negative than necessary or need to be. There are achievements. We are making progress. Liberty movement is stronger now than it's ever been, or certainly hasn't in my lifetime in Australia. We have people who joined the party to oppose lockdowns, but are staying for libertarian philosophy and the idea they understand the idea that the problem is not that Dan Andrews is a psychopath.
Yeah.
The problem is the government has the power, and you might have a good premier, but they're still going to be imposing bad things on people. And either way, you're putting powers in place for when a bad premier comes along to exploit. So the problem is not who's in government; the problem is the government itself, and you have to cut the government back.
Yeah, we see a lot of that messaging at the moment. The whole sack Dan, anti-Dan crowd, as if you cut off the head of the snake, as if that is a solution to killing the entire snake. Like a libertarian understands that that's just the nature of government, is to have whoever succeeds him will be a similar kind of figure.
And when the Liberal Democrats form government and we have with majority power with a premier, I'll be very, very happy if there is a breakaway libertarian movement attacking us for being statists.
And knowing libertarians, there will almost certainly be a breakaway.
I'll probably join that group.
So when libertarians form government, we can refer back to the secret plan that was accidentally leaked on David Limbrick's whiteboard a month ago, which was step 1, take over the world. Step 2, leave everyone alone.
That's a world I can live in. All right, well, that's about the hour mark. Thank you so much for your time, Tim. Max and I certainly, I hope I'm speaking for Max when I say this, we hope that you get elected again. You've been very much a shining light during the pandemic. I remember at the darkest points when it looked like mandates were going to come in, and I was, when they came in and I was unemployed, I remember thinking, who can I email? Who can I get into contact with? I just want to sweep the floors in Tim Quilty's office or David Limbrick's office. I just want to do something to help these guys. So yeah, no, thanks for what you're doing now and the hope that you gave people then, because I'm sure you know about it, but it's something that we really appreciated at the time.
And thank you to everyone who has spoken up, because sometimes when we were doing that, it felt like we're standing up here doing this and no one's even listening. There were days we're going, we're not doing anything, we're not achieving anything. So it's always good to get out in the public and hear people who did get the messaging and did understand what was going on, and say we did make a difference.
Well, it's almost the reverse frog in the pot, with the water being slowly turned back up, but it's the liberty movement, isn't it? You might feel like people aren't listening, but you're planting the seeds, the water's slowly getting turned up, and then who knows, maybe one day there'll be an even greater awakening. Maybe. I'm an optimist. Oh, thanks for coming on, Tim. Good luck with the campaign. Hopefully you've got a few more mates sitting in there with you next term.
That will be the ideal outcome. If we get 3 or 4 of us on the crossbench, then every government will have to be afraid of us and start paying attention to us. Let's see.
Perfect. Thanks for watching us. For our viewers, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and follow us on Spotify. Thank you so much, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Pietro.
Yeah.